I really didn't want to like this surfboard, but as of today, I can't get off the thing. And I think it might be the best surfboard I've ever bought. My name's Simon from Renegade Surf Travel, and we run world-class surf coaching trips in some of the most progression-friendly waves on Earth. Running trips throughout the season in the Maldives and Indonesia, I get to see a huge variety of surfers in a huge variety of conditions, seeing what works, what doesn't, and that includes myself. Now, full disclaimer, I've never been a mid-length guy, and to be honest, I've always kind of shunned them. But as a coaching company, we're constantly telling our guests to bring a mid-length with them if they're not too sure on what they should be bringing. Reason being, we see far too many surfers turning up with surfboards that are way too small for them and not catching enough waves to get the repetitions that they require to see any meaningful improvement. And so last season, I decided to practice what I preach and bought the Slater Designs Boss Up. All right, so why did I choose the Boss Up? Well, there's three reasons really. Firstly, I wanted something that felt like a reasonable transition from my go-to shortboard, which is the Slater Designs FRK Swallow in Ibolic construction. This board has the same construction, it has the same 5-fin futures setup, and it's more of a performance-oriented mid-length rather than a cruiser. Secondly, I wanted something that would go in a large variety of conditions, something that I could pull out the bag if the waves were a little bit too soft for me to have fun on my FRK, and something that I could also pull out if, conditions were on the upper end of the scale where my FRK would be redlining. I wanted something that I could pull out and have the paddle power and confidence in bigger conditions. And thirdly, and more of a practical reason, I've got a 6'6" DB board bag. This is a 6'6" and it just fits in the bag. Now, to be honest, I expected the board to be useful, a bit of a utility tool, but I didn't think it would be very exciting, but I was definitely wrong. My first sessions on this board were in the exact kind of conditions that I think would be perfect for this board. Sort of chest to shoulder high, fairly soft, glassy runners in the Maldives. I was also coming off a shoulder injury at the time and hadn't surfed much, and so I just wanted something that was easy to surf. But what shocked me in those sessions the most was that once I kind of got my feet figured out in terms of where I wanted to be on the board, you could really surf this thing from the tail in the pocket, and I did some turns on this board that I would have been proud of on my shortboard. Then I went back home and took this board on a couple of strike missions in the UK, and it absolutely saved both trips where I got completely skunked. The swell didn't fill in, and to be honest, if I hadn't have had this board with me, both of those trips would have been a complete write-off. But as it happened, I ended up having a couple of really fun surfs in some gutless conditions on this board. Now I do not go anywhere without this board in the van. Most recently, and perhaps most surprisingly, I took this board on a trip up to Scotland with me where I scored absolutely pumping waves. I wasn't necessarily intending to ride this board when I was up there in sort of really good waves, but on day one, it was quite small and I arrived. This board was already waxed up and ready to go. It had fins in, and so I just took it out for a kind of a warm-up session. But it felt so good that on the last day of the trip, when the waves were way overhead and really hollow, I decided to take this thing out again. And safe to say, to this date, I've had more tubes on this board than any other. Now, that's not necessarily because I think this is a magic board, but I think for the average surfer, being able to get into the wave early, get to your feet, have time, and set your line can be the difference between making the tube of your life or getting lipped in the head. It certainly was for me. Ultimately, this board has taught me one really important lesson, and that is that for the average surfer, the most valuable thing you can give yourself to improve your surfing is time. Now, to be honest, I've always hated the term one board quiver. I've owned a handful of boards that would come in that sort of segment over the last 15 years. And to be honest, to me, they all felt too compromised in all areas. However, this is the first board that I've owned that I think can confidently call itself a one-board quiver. If you're coming on a trip, especially a coaching trip, you don't want to be overthinking your equipment. And if you can ride the same board in a variety of different conditions, that's going to prevent you from having to kind of readjust to a new board every time you paddle out when the conditions are slightly different. Ultimately, the less energy that you have to spend thinking about your equipment is more energy you can spend on improving your surfing. All right, so who is this board for? Well, if I'm being completely honest, I don't think there are many surfers who wouldn't benefit from at least having one board like this in their quiver. If you're going on a trip and you can only take 1 or 2 boards, having something like this is going to cover a lot of ground for you. If you're a level 2 surfer coming on one of our trips, you know, you could size this up, something in the 7.0 and above range, and really enjoy the paddle power, forgiveness and glide that it's going to give you. For level 3 surfers, maybe something in the 6.8 to 6.10 range is going to give you that really nice balance of wave count, but without feeling like it's holding you back once you're up and riding. And then for a level 4 surfer or someone coming from a performance shortboard like myself, go for the 6.6 and just enjoy all the added time that you're going to get to choose good lines on a wave. All right, now having said all that, no surfboard is perfect and all boards have their compromises. And so far I've found 2 drawbacks with this surfboard. The first one is I didn't like it in slabby waves. Now, I'm not a charger, I don't surf slabby waves very often, but on a recent trip to Ireland, I paddled this out in some slabbier conditions and it definitely did feel like too much board to fit into such a bowly pocket. But the reality is that for 95% of surfers, we're not surfing slabby waves anyway. And for everything else, this board excels. The more kind of realistic drawback with this board for me is that I do actually find it quite difficult to transition between my high performance shortboard and this board, and that applies whether I'm going from the short board to the mid-length or the mid-length back to the short board. It definitely takes me at least an hour when I change from one to the other to kind of readjust, find my feet again, and yeah, feel like I can surf properly. However, for me, I think the positives far outweigh the negatives, and I am slightly embarrassed to say that this might be the best surfboard I've ever bought. All right, so a quick note about fins before I wrap this video up. Now, I know for most enthusiasts of this surfboard, they're all about the quad setup. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to try that yet, but I have tried it as a thruster and I have tried it as a twin with a trailer. Now, for me, the thruster had more speed, more drive, and more hold on rail. And so whilst the twin with trailer was fun, the thruster was the clear winner. However, I am really excited to try it as a quad pretty soon. So there we go. That is my opinion of the Slater Designs Boss Up. As always, if you've got any questions or opinions, please drop them below and love to get a discussion going in the comments. And finally, if you want to know more about Renegade Surf Travel and what we do, hit the link in the description below, and I look forward to surfing with you in paradise in the not too distant future.